Hello and welcome to Liminal Light, a show that explores earth and sky and the spirits that reside there through art, literature, magic, culture, and creative action. I'm your host, Chris. Enjoy. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to Liminal Light. We're going to talk once again about the pair of lunations between the 28 shapes, commonly referred to as the 28 lunar mansions, beginning typically with 0 degrees Aries at vernal equinox and following the moon's travel around back to that degree through 28 shapes. And we primarily look at the list from the prayer to Mene and the Greek magical papyri as kind of a nexus to vector out from into all of the traditions of 28ism and 27ism, into the Indian nakshatras, the Chinese lunar mansions, the Arabic lunar mansions, the syncretization to the grimoire tradition and how that syncretizes out into New World traditions and so on. And we kind of use this more lunar rather than solar information to talk about how things are going to hit on an archetypal, on a subconscious, on a creative, intuitive, embodied, physical, sublunar layer rather than just occurrences in the world. But we will talk some mundane astrology also, because we've been noticing a lot of the shapes that we discuss kind of come out there, and information that we might not normally notice with the regular 12 sign zodiac. And so without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Elodie.
Oh, hi.
Hi. You want to tell people who you are?
I'm Elodie Saint-Onge-Aubu. I'm a French-Canadian living in Newfoundland. And yeah, I'm just collaborating on this project for the last 2 years. And that's it. We're going to jam on the lunar zodiac.
Okay, and this is kind of a weird episode. It's kind of a recap, and then we're going to talk about the upcoming eclipse in the shape of deer, which will fall in tropical Sagittarius. The reason we're doing a recap is because, as you know, if you track the moon through the shapes, you'll notice that some of the moon will be in 2 mansions spanning 2 calendar dates as the whole thing sort of phases across days. You know, the sun and the moon is elliptical to the sun. And so the same thing will happen with the 28 shapes bracketing a time period. So we end up with like 2 lunations within 1 cycle of the sidereal 28. And then over time, that'll phase to like we have 1 lunation in one lunation in the other. And we have to kind of adjust and pick or choose which bracket we're going to go to, like almost like leap years or something, go backwards or forwards. So this time we're going to recap the last eclipse, and we're going to talk about the upcoming eclipse rather than doing the 2 upcoming pairs as we usually do.
Yeah,
Okay.
so let's recap the eclipse that happened on November 19. It was a partial lunar eclipse in Falcon, which falls between 21 of Taurus and 4 degrees of Gemini. So that's the Falcon place, or the 5th lunar mansion. And I think this one, you know, what we've been noticing is that like the new moon that happened on November 4 was exactly opposing Uranus. And I think that it was part of the sort of emerging narrative of this lunation.
Sorry. I'm instantly having technical difficulties here. Just bear with me for one moment.
Yeah, so, you know, I think we can look at the first eclipse that happened in Taurus or in Falcon place, but I think the new moon, like 2 weeks before that, really like strongly influenced like what emerged from the lunar eclipse there in Falcon.
Yeah, definitely. With like Uranus's influence, and then also I think we noticed after the last episode we talked about because that lunation in Scorpio had been in Leopard and was at least in that system in like the Arabic lunar mansions that would correspond to the heart. And then we saw as we're moving into like Taurus Scorpio eclipses and people having complications with the vaccinations affecting their heart. And with Uranus being right with the lunation there, like right opposite that in Taurus, it that influence of people having erratic heart beats and erratic heart conditions after vaccination. And we're probably going to see a lot more of this within the next 18 and a half months with South Node and Scorpio and North Node and Taurus. But we also got like immediately after that lunation, the events at the Astro World concert.
That was before the eclipse. It was like,
but it was right after that Leopard lunation, I think.
Yeah, but it was still kind of, you know, really the reason why we're attaching it so much to the eclipse is because that first lunar eclipse in Falcon was near Algol, which is the head of Medusa, and the astral world even had this giant head, and it was just this like pure chaos. And when it happened, it was like, oh my god, like this is really the incoming eclipse, even though it hadn't occurred yet.
Yeah, it made total sense. I mean, and then the shapes that we're going to see like in the next set of eclipses on April 30th, when we get more northern eclipses in Taurus, and with Venus ruling Taurus being in Pisces, with Jupiter in Pisces, both exalted and in rulership, conjunct ruling over this Uranus Taurus eclipse. Like it totally looks like this kind of like psycho giant Woodstock concert type pleasure event. But then we got the Scorpio version of that leading
on
up
May
to
16.
Yeah, or on well the Scorpio version also leading up to the Astro World event.
Oh yeah. And also what I noticed when I was like kind of looking at November is there was a lot of upheaval, and there was a lot of sort of emerging themes for this Scorpio Taurus axis, but it really began with that new moon. There was the flood on the west coast of Canada, like major floods that they're still dealing with, like extreme weather pattern where it cut off the road completely. So then they had to start rationing gas, and there was no more food in the grocery stores, which we had talked about with that lunar eclipse there. Just like, you know, new themes emerging with like food supply shortage, and then natural disaster that often comes with like intense eclipses.
Yeah, and the nature of Algol kind of being like this like primal nature that can both like, you know, nature nourishes all of us, but also can totally destroy us all. And relating back to early, like kind of proto or pre-Indo-European cultures that, you know, when we associate with like the snake cult and things like that, that are more perpetuating nature to not kill everybody rather than sort of this agrarian version where you're just sort of like doing all these fertility rituals to have like really good harvests, more just kind of being like, don't poison me, like eat me, kill me, strangle me, you know.
Yeah, we had talked about poison too for that new moon in Leopard, because that's like a strong theme there. And so the Astro World event, supposedly it was like people getting injected with something also. So that's been like a really strong theme coming through.
Yeah, and like fear of being injected with mysterious drugs after like a year and a half of people being injected with mysterious drugs.
Yeah. Also, the COP26 summit happened in Glasgow, which was the 31st of October to the 12th of November, leading again to that lunar eclipse with like incoming themes of climate change narrative that we're going to see a lot more once these eclipses happen on this axis. So it's like a major preview of themes. Like I think November overall, it was very eclipsy, and we had like a good preview of the themes to come.
Yeah, totally. And then all the like right around November 19th, there was crazy crypto Web3 expansion. There was like the Constitution DAO, where like a decentralized autonomous organization of a few thousand people came together in a week and raised $41 million to try to buy the only private copy of the US Constitution. They just barely didn't do it. Crypto.com bought the Staples Center, like Lakers Stadium, or the name. So now it says Crypto.com on it. A giant, like I think the second most or the most giant real estate entity in China, Everland, went almost totally bankrupt, and that caused major fluctuation in world markets and kind of scared the shit out of everybody money wise. And then the company Gemini, run by a pair of twins, which I'm not going to try to remember their name right now because I can't remember, and it'll just sound crazy, but you can look it up. Gemini created a alternative to Facebook's metaverse and are putting like $400 million into that, which, the North Node during this eclipse, this Taurus eclipse, was still in Gemini. So we're getting this kind of blend of things. Then there's like Biden signed legislature to change the status of crypto holders to be broker status, which also is like a huge deal within the crypto space. And then there was this trial between the computer expert Craig S. Wright and an old associate, David Kleiman, where a court had ordered Wright to give $500,000 of his Bitcoin holdings to David Kleiman's estate, as he had already died mysteriously in 2013 when the nodes were in the opposite axis, when the North Node was in Scorpio and the South Node was in Taurus. And then that was also his natal nodal opposition, David Kleiman's. So that's a big story for crypto, as Craig Wright is this person who tons of people think he's fraudulent. He's a really controversial character, but he claims to be Satoshi, the mysterious creator of Bitcoin. So this is things that are like happening that not everyone's paying attention to, but they're definitely like changing the fabric of currency, and then tying into these eclipses that are going on.
Yeah, so to recap, just like the incoming themes with, that we saw in November and that will probably be big next year: currency, crypto, flood disaster, climate change narrative being injected by mysterious poison, and food and gasoline.
And crazy concerts, like insane concert events, I think is going to continue.
You think so?
Yeah, I think with that, like April 30th, 2022, we're going to get they were calling Astroworld the concert from hell. And I don't know if they'll call this one the concert from heaven, but there was just starting to be legislature. New Zealand just today or yesterday, just in the past week, became the first nation to legalize drug testing sites at public events, so that people doing MDMA and things like that are doing all totally legit, clean, legal drugs, and no one's dying from fentanyl or other things that are causing hospitalizations and deaths during public events.
That's cool. That might be a nice that might be a nice sort of incoming thing with these eclipses. The other thing I forgot too, psychedelic therapy is really starting, and they open like a clinic again in DC. It's kind of getting mainstream. so I don't know which end of the axis it falls through, but I would put that more into the South Node Scorpio. Healing trauma with psychedelic or something.
Yeah, because when Pluto is in Scorpio, we got like crack, and now South Node in Scorpio being like, let's clean up these drugs, let's clean up the things that bring us to this kind of like deep alchemical guttural experience. And then with North Node in Taurus, like let's have a good, smooth, steady experience, but also like with Uranus there in sort of a radical fashion, we also see the same kind of thing triggered with like labor organizers saying like no more forced vaccination, no more scorpionic injections, because we need to do our job like Taurus.
That would make a great T-shirt. Let's capitalize on that.
Yeah, no more scorpionic injections. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, so yeah, totally wrap up.
So that was November incoming themes for the new cycle of eclipse that will begin soon.
So maybe we want to just scroll right ahead to the upcoming eclipse, which is going to be on December 4th.
And this eclipse happened in Deer Mention, which falls between 4 and 17 degrees of Sagittarius. And so we had an eclipse, we had a lunar eclipse in Deer Mention in May, 26th of May. And then this is going to be a solar eclipse. And it's going to be the last one of all of this cycle of eclipse on the Gemini Sagittarius axis. It closed down a year and a half of eclipse here. So I think there's like a real sort of synthesizing moment about this. I don't think it's going to be like new theme emerging, because it's the last one here. And then the nodes are going to be ingressing into Taurus and Scorpio. So this moment, the December 4th eclipse, it's a new moon, but it's being eclipsed, and it's a South Node eclipse. So there's really synthesizing of the lost, very simply put, like the South Node is more about spiritual enlightenment that comes through being denied things. So there's a synthesis available for, wisdom or comprehension around like everything that you were denied in the last year and a half.
Which we talked about. There already was another eclipse, I think, in Deer 6 months ago, and I think we talked about that in another show, and we were predicting along the lines of what we see within Deer shape. We'll talk more about Artemis, but likely the PGM saying Deer refers to Artemis. What we see in Artemis is the lunar goddess of hunting in the wilds, and what we see in the Picatrix as an image is the head and arms of a man and body of a horse holding a bow. So a centaur, Sagittarius, essentially. So again, we get this kind of like the wilds and archery and hunting, the elections for taming wild, disobedient beasts, and also travel by road and bringing people together and joining people. The talisman is for hunting in the fields, which we use wolf hair incense, which makes sense. It's like a materia of the wilds, and something from an animal that's a predator. And then the Grimorium Verum spirit says brings people from far away, which sounds similar to the Picatrix saying like joining people in road travel. And the Kimbanda Eshu that syncretizes to that Grimorium Verum spirit is Eshu das Matas, of the forests or of the bushes. So again, out into the wilds. So we were talking last year about this all kind of sounds like, in
May, you mean?
In May, yeah. About people saying, like, we got to get out of the city, because at that point in May, the winter was ending, mask mandates in the US were coming off, but things were in Canada and other places like Australia were tightening. And for various reasons, people were kind of like, we got to get out of the city. We got to get out to the woods. We got to, people were buying RVs like crazy, converting old short buses and things to mobile homes. Were buying properties in the countryside and selling their properties in the city. So we saw a lot of this kind of influence of Deer Mansion kind of in the behavior of people and their desires and their like what was motivating them from like a body level. And then now this is the last of those eclipses, but we're coming in the northern hemisphere into winter, so there might be a different sentiment.
Yeah, and the biggest difference is that eclipse in May was ruled by Jupiter in Pisces, and this same placement eclipse is ruled by Jupiter in Aquarius. That's why I was speaking of a synthesis too, because there was more opening available in May. Jupiter in Pisces was really bringing this sort of opening new narrative. If we think of Dare as like the edge of the city, the border that separates the wild from the civilized world, you know, maps and paths and mobility and movement, but it's a south node eclipse, so it's like all of these things denied basically. But I think that Jupiter in Pisces really brought like, I don't know, like a sort of crack in the, you know, an ability to kind of like work your way out of that south node sort of quagmire that we've been in. But this one, because it's like ruled by Jupiter in Aquarius, I think more so it's a synthesis of like, okay, the world is actually changed. Like mobility, the way mobility works in the world is not going to go back to normal. And I don't want to say this is the new normal because I don't think it is. But, you know, vax pass, air travels, and the variants will most likely continue to occur. So this is very well the result of like all of the south node eclipse that happened here and there. And this is kind of the status quo in terms of travel now, you know, and we're coming to the realization of that. Like, you probably don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
I don't think that we're soon going to just like lift all vaccine passports and, you know, start like having mobility like we used to.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is like the end of that kind of loss, you know, that shedding. In this process, you know, at least this like south node, north node process, you know, and like those are all significations of Sagittarius in general. But like we were saying, if you look, there's 2.5 mansions per 12 zodiac sign. And if you look at this one, the Picatrix says specifically like road travel and quick return, men to join together as you wish, good people coming together, but also firming incarceration, you know? And so they're...
Yeah, and because the south node, the nature of the south node, like if the north node was here, it would have been more of that probably, you know. But the nature of the south node is to deny.
Well, also like as we were talking about, like they're either end of Satan on your shoulder, you know, the south node and the north node, and like, you know, when Satan's sitting on your shoulder influencing you, it's saying things like. Don't worry about travel and getting together as people. You don't want to, don't worry about that. You don't want to like get out into the world, like into the woods and hang out with people. You want to, you know, as north
buy nodes, more stuff online.
Yeah. North nodes in Gemini. It's like, just be online. Just like, you know, just talk to your friends online. Just like, and then by the end of the cycle, we have the emergence of like the metaverse, you know, like, and so, yeah.
Some of I was kind of like just, you know, I never get tired of researching the nodes, and like even though probably a lot of you, including you, know like the signification of, you know, K2 and or the south node, but one of the things that's associated with K2 and negative signification is like confusion, depression, mindlessness, complete detachment, loss of concentration, worries, anxieties. And it is said, like in modern astrology, it's a little bit controversial, but it is like, I guess, depending on the astrology like school. But the south node is said to be exalted in Sagittarius, and the north node is exalted in Gemini. And if we think that the nodes are actually malefic, what does it mean when a malefic planet is exalted, it means that it's like extreme manifestation. My personal observation and opinion, I think you agree with me, is that like the North Node in Gemini is probably the worst place for the North Node.
Yeah.
So the South Node is actually said to be exalted in Sagittarius, and the South Node is just a body without a head. And some of the information I was reading was like, oh well, Sagittarius is like the body of an animal and the head of a man. But the positive manifestation of the South Node, the deeper sort of, result, and I think that's where we're at now. It's not like this is the beginning. We're kind of closing this whole cycle of South Node eclipse here. And it brings enlightenment and liberation. And you don't reach enlightenment or liberation through like drinking cocktails and eating caviar,
Not all the time, but sometimes.
There's something about losing your head, in a worldly sense. And it's kind of the South Node is the personification of renunciation. And we had to renunciate. This was kind of like not voluntarily renunciation, but I think now there's an opportunity, especially that it's like the last one, it's a new moon. It's a solar eclipse, but there's an opportunity to sort of really assimilate the more spiritual, ascetic, mystical aspect of, a South Node eclipse, especially when it comes to where Sagittarius or particularly if you have like planets in the first like degrees of Sagittarius. But like in terms of,
oh wait, go ahead, sorry.
I was just gonna say in terms of like mobility and perspective and potentiality and all of these themes, like what sort of like renewal, reset, and sort of deeper understanding, is coming through the song.
It's like we're becoming ascetics like in that department, but ascetics of what, or of like what deity. Sorry, I have like screen issues going on, but there's too many things open. But yeah, like it's like what deity are we an ascetic of? And like we can see through this mansion, through Deer Mansion, that it points to Artemis, and so like being an ascetic as like almost an ascetic devotee of Artemis is almost like metaphorically or literally what this particular eclipse, like reoccurring in that shape, is suggesting. And Artemis was, as we were saying, was a huntress related to season. This mansion at the place in Sagittarius is often like, at least in this region of the world, it's often hunting season around the time that the sun goes through this, right between, like after the leaves are off the trees, but like early winter, late fall. And then Artemis also is known to be a virginal goddess, to be related to purity, to childbirth, to hunting, and almost because she, that was a thing in the Greco monde at the time. You would abstain from sex before you'd go hunting, so that you didn't have the scent on you and you could be more purified. And so she has this nature of being attuned to the wilds and good at hunting because of her purity and virtue. And she also like, that was to do with marriage. Like Aphrodite was the one who was going to become married and become conventional. And it's not necessarily that Artemis is not sensual. It's that she's not going to be controlled by the conventions of society. She's going to be more wild and be out in the wild. So her virginity is, in a sense, like ritual purification, but also like a kind of protest to the strictures of the norms of society, tying you down so that you can be more attuned to the animal world and be able to like see it and communicate with it. So it's like, as to be like, if the South Node is here, it's like an asceticism to these principles. But she was also a civic goddess. She was the daughter of Leto and Zeus, and the twin sister of Apollo. And Apollo, there they are, the twins. Apollo relating to the to field mouse, to mouse from the shape previous. And we've talked about that on the show. It's like Apollo might bring blights and and maladies that like affect in this kind of insidious way, like in like Legion, whereas like Artemis often brings malady as well as cure to women and children, and in this same to childbirthing women and children, and in this same time period, there's like where we can't travel and etc. There's also like nurses being at the forefront, quitting their jobs because and being overworked, like and also like children in schools being under a lot of stress. Like I was just looking today, there was a school shooting this week or yesterday in Michigan, and it's the 28th of this year, and it specifically is known like around Artemis that she can bring malady to children when you're not in a state of civilized and also socialized virtue. When people are living in this like unclean, cruel to animals, like antisocial manner, it's the childbearing mothers and the children who often get it. And we see like she doesn't hold back. Like in the myths, she shoots Orion, she destroys like Actaeon. There's all these instances of her being very supportive, but also quite cruel when you're not in line with these virtues that uphold both, like kind of where society meets the natural world. And we can see her conducting such behavior here. This is her killing Actaeon. She's often seen with dogs. There's her chariot drawn by deer. Part of the main association with deer there. There's some rather like fabulous Artemis of Ephesus, these statues that like really vary, where she's kind of this like, where you see some of the maternal stuff coming through. This is probably like really, really old imagery. There's her fam, like Zeus and Leto and Apollo and her. Interesting about her being a twin is that it's directly opposite Gemini, where we would, Castor and Pollux here in Gemini, versus like there's twins on either side of the zodiac. And we don't usually think about that, but we see that when we look at the lunar layers. And then also she got her bow and arrow from the Cyclops, which is another interesting thing because we get the algal, eclipse in Falcon, where we have images of the evil eye, the Gorgon's head, that we see on various like coins and emblems, and then the evil eye, like apotropaic charms, which we talked about in the last podcast, and the eye of Horus and the eye of Ra, all being related. And then we see that like as we had a lunation there, and then within 2 weeks when we get another lunation, we get a lunation at a shape where the deity that might be associated with that shape receives her weapon from a Cyclops, and we see some of this transfer echo of some of these like more subtle shapes, like the eye of Ra and the eye of the Falcon and the eye of the evil eye coming from the Gorgon's head, and like the eclipsing binary blinking star. 2 weeks later you get a lunation that has this relation to this Cyclops that gives weaponry to a deity whose companion is often a dog. And then the next lunation 2 weeks after this is going to be in Dog Mansion. So we see that there are these like kind of complex interweaving patterns that
and
go.
Dog Mansion, just to mention,
Dog
Mansion is it's actually between 17 Gemini and 0 Cancer. So the full moon in Gemini in December is going to be in Dog Mansion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like it's almost like all of these shapes, all of these stories and subtleties and nuances, like mythological and like theological nuances packed into the way the moon travels, weaves back and forth across the zodiac. And if you get a lunation here, you're gonna next get a lunation in that territory, most likely. So you'll like kind of get this like algal, you'll get this like falcon, deer, dog rhythm certain years, and so you'll get this kind of like Gorgon's head, Artemis, Cyclops, dog kind of pattern. But
this whole like Artemis like punishing people who are not in the state of purity could be seen in so many ways for what's going on right now, because if you see how the vaccination is polarizing people into two camps, and both camps are have this same sort of attitude that we could say is the right one. So like Artemis is not like Artemis being associated with this dimension, this place, but because the South Node is there, I think like there's something about not thinking and losing your head in this sort of righteous punishment thing.
Yeah, that's literally what she does in her stories. Like Actaeon boasts or Orion boasts that they're the best hunter and they're going to kill all the animals. And she's like, no, fuck you. I'm going to kill you right now, actually,
Yeah, well, what I was saying is just like, yeah, it sounds like, I don't know. We could apply this sort of behavior to like what's going on right now from both, the people
totally
who think like vaccination is good and people who think it's not good,
Yeah, definitely.
Just to be impartial.
Yeah.
Interesting about the purity part with Artemis and their mention, because the 20th mention, the 20th nakshatra in the Vedic tradition, Purva Ashada, is actually associated with water, and specifically the purifying qualities of water. So again, there's like a parallel with this sort of healing qualities and nurturing qualities just transferred into like the nakshatra system. So like they speak of like water just like cleansing all impurities and poison, basically. And another interesting thing about that nakshatra, the 20th nakshatra, or the 20th, it's associated with a basket, and it's like when you throw the grains from the basket up, and then just to like sift and sort out like all the husks, and just come with like the only like the grain that you need. Mixture of grain and chaff, you throw that into the air so the wind blows away all the lighter chaff, and then the heavier grain falls back down, and that's what you use. So there's like this sort of process of like sorting and purifying also associated with this nakshatra.
Yeah, which is interesting because it's also the deity there is Shukra, Venus, and so we end up getting like a feminine deity in both systems. And then the rhythm of the 28 shapes in the Greek magical papyri has, you get this kind of like Apollo, Artemis, then Dragoness as you approach 0 degrees Capricorn and move into wintertime. Then you get all the shapes of the cult objects of Hecate, beginning with Virgin. So on either side of like Dragoness, which that shape in the 21st mansion in the Pigatrix is the city. And as you approach, like, it's these twin civic deities, Apollo and Artemis, approaching the kind of initiatory moment, and the kind of meeting the initiatrix, the Dragoness, and the chthonic like hidden horrors of nature. And then you get Virgin after, kind of being like Hestia and the Vestal Virgins in that shape. So you get this like around the event of initiation for various in perspectives, this kind of purification. And on this end of it, in Artemis, it's also like we're saying, it's like it is supportive to children and to mothers and also just like attention to them, but then to animals in the wilds, and just like talking about that rhythm that we went through of just kind of being like, okay, there's ecological disaster, there's reduction of travel, than other themes coming up of just like, well, you know, shutting stuff down was pretty good for wildlife, you know, but obviously human civilization can't just stop. And that's not what deities like Artemis or Apollo would enjoy. You know, we move forward into more Dionysian shapes too, and people need to come together and converge. Like, I mean, she wants, like Artemis and Apollo, you know, we see in this mansion, it's like good for bringing people together. But unfortunately, right now, the South Node is there. So we have to be kind of ascetical about it for the time period and notice, you know, how to treat the wilds more appropriately and how to.
Yeah, I think like with the South Node there, it's like an amazing opportunity for like purification, cleansing, spiritual observance, like fasting, maybe even like reading scriptures, you know, because it doubles up on the significance of this place being like a cleansing place, and then the South Node signification, like you're not gaining in material. It's not the time to go buy a house right now. It's kind of like, you know, it's a nice opportunity for reflection and purification.
But it is a time to take up archery.
You think so?
Well, I mean, I literally did this year. Well, I didn't think about it till now, but by these, you know, more things are closed, and I just got interested in like archery and fly fishing. You know, so it's like a better time to kind of just be in those kinds of activities.
You know, you were saying that the nakshatra, the 20th nakshatra, is ruled by Venus, and when I was like reading about it, they were like obviously talking about like the more sort of indulging aspects of Venus. So there's still like this mention could be dual in a way, like there is the more like physical manifestation, but I think just because the South Node is there right now, it has a lot more to do with like inertia, you know, a certain level of inertia. The animal that is associated with the 20th nakshatra, you know, we associate it with deer, but the classic Vedic literature associate with the elephant, and specifically the tusk. And the example that they were giving is like the elephant, like the soul, like the elephant is kind of like attuned to the interrelationship of all things, and it's kind of like placidly looking back at everything that is, unless it gets really stirred. So on a superficial level, it's kind of like associated with a sort of inertia until the elephant get aroused. So I thought that was interesting. And then the tusk, which is the most valuable part of the elephant, is a sort of externalization of the inner possibilities of the animal. So when the tusk is severed, it has the power to grow back. So the quality of wisdom that grows under the influence of that nakshatra, Purvashada, is kind of like this regenerating quality, you know. And the reason I'm saying all this is because when we're doing research back, like, you know, in the last couple of years, when we were doing drawings and stuff, most of my drawings in this mention, I always had antlers.
Yeah, totally.
Weird, but I had antlers, and it's like a parallel to the tusk, which is traditionally associated with that nakshatra. Yeah, and I also had a lot of seeds, which is like the wicker basket and the.
Oh yeah, me too. Totally, I totally did too. Yeah, let's show the drawings. Like, I just wanted to say, like, before we show the drawings, because you're totally right. Is that when you're talking about the tusk, I was thinking about this crescent on Artemis's head, and also like the regeneration and her role as like season. It's like seasonality. But yeah, let's look at these.
Yeah, so as I was saying earlier, you know, the symbol associated with this nakshatra is the winnowing basket, which involves throwing the mixture of grain and chaff into the air, and then the wind blows away all the lighter chaff, and then you're left with the grains, kind of representing like a sort of spiritual process of purification and kind of, how do you say in English, like narrowing down, you know? And funnily enough, like when we were doing these drawings, like I just found this information about the nakshatra, but doing the drawings, which was very like intuitive channel state, there was always grains coming through And so, you know, there's something to that. There's
Yeah, look at this one. I mean, you can see the grains. It's crazy.
There's this sort of eternal principles that are found in the lunar mention, no matter if you look at like what we've been researching, which, you know, was emerging just from like a trance state versus like the pre-existing literature of the nakshatras or even like the Picatrix and stuff that is there. So, but the parallel with the 20th nakshatra is really significant just for the antler and the grains aspect.
Yeah, which is interesting because, you know, everyone makes an effort to just use the 27 system of the nakshatras and delete the extra small, like 28th one. But there also is a tradition of 28 nakshatras that speaks more to what the PGM seems to be speaking to, which is kind of like reincarnation and ritual preparation for reincarnation and how that all occurs. So if you just turn it into 28 and then, you know, use all 28 and then change the degrees to not be sidereally in 27 set, they'll end up just overlapping. The 20th will be the 20th, the 21st will be the 21st, et cetera. And you can kind of look at them both ways because we're getting star information as well as, I don't want to say tropical information, but like sequential organization. This is one of your drawings. I'm going to go back to your drawings to show that for people who are just listening to the podcast, there's a visual version on YouTube where you can follow along with what we're looking at. I just want to show, because I think I have mine from the same night. Is that?
Yeah, and in the observation, like when I was like in my research on May 8th, 2020, I was like, oh, what came up in the drawing constantly is a type of vase or a bowl or a receptacle with plant seed growing in and also antlers.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's just like totally looks like the information from the Artemis with the deer chariot stuff. And then like you're saying with all the nakshatra information of the vase with the basket.
So that's the basic signification for this deer mention, but because it's again a south node eclipse and it's a new moon, but it's a new moon being eclipse, I think, like I said, it's not so much I guess it could be the emergence, like a sort of new beginning, but it's this understanding of what the past year and a half like implies in terms of mobility and this, you know, from a mundane perspective, like what mobility and like travel represent now. Also, what I want to say is that eclipses tend to bring the events and things. My speculation, because the Saturn Uranus square is coming on Christmas, my speculation is that this eclipse will trigger some border closing, as we've already kind of seen because of the new variant. So already people who are vaccinated need to isolate again. People who travel need to isolate when re-entering like Canada here and stuff. So we're already seeing the deer signification, borders, crossing, landscape and stuff kind of, you know, being eclipsed, being south node eclipsed. So my speculation for December is that we're not going to gain more mobility, but probably leading to Christmas, we're just going to have, again, like these kind of tighter restrictions to contend with. But Jupiter enters Pisces at the end of December. So like, I don't think that's going to stick as long.
Yeah, totally. No, totally agreed. But it's interesting, you know, with like I've noticed with the South Node over the years that like you get rid of things when it's South Node time. So we'll lose things, but it makes space for the emergence of a new way of doing almost that same thing. Like I know, like within the past year, within the time of these eclipses, you and I both got rid of cars and got a truck, you know, like, it's like, there's both like I changed up a lot of my mobility infrastructure, you know, like, and that involved getting rid of things that weren't working correctly, you know?
Yeah, what I've seen in people's life that have like important planets in the dimension is a lot of like spiritual hardship, like a lot of really fundamental like really fundamental hardship that is not necessarily like external, but this sort of sense of like, well, literal loss, or, you know, these kind of like limits. So I think for these people in particular, when I've been consulting with them, is more like what I've seen now is this period of like catching your breath and kind of have a new like a new understanding and more calmness, but also this deep sense of you know, I don't know, like being brutalized by mundane existence, you know, and what it brings. Like it brings wisdom, but it's through hardship. So just on a personal level, and it's not affecting everybody the same way, obviously. That's why there's like eclipse remediation protocols, you know. And I think in terms of like this particular one, it's like if you work with it in a, you know, in a purification cleansing way, I think it could be extremely beneficial for like the spiritual soul aspect of your existence.
Yeah, totally. And like if you were to look at it in the PGM sense, you could from the very get-go, you know, if we had started in the beginning of this eclipse, axis is playing out, you could have been petitioning and devoting time and attention to Artemis to kind of bring you through this set of eclipses, to have it resonate with you in a kind of like divinely coherent way rather than a totally painful and disruptive way. Like she would help lead you through. And like in a nakshatra sense, like if we were going to work with that nakshatra, like Shukra, like could serve the same purpose. And if we look at the Chinese lunar mansions, we would like the starting point is totally different because of precession and when the tradition started. But it would be the fifth Chinese mansion, which is Jin, or heart. And then the planet associated with that mansion is the moon, and the animal associated with that mansion is the fox. So again, we see like a similar, like a lunar goddess with like a canine companion expressed in the Chinese lunar mansion. But also when it talks about the heart, it talks about similar stuff. And when they say heart, they mean mind. But there's these principles of talking about making sure that you have your mind in order and your heart in order so that you can develop good character, so that you can be healthy. You know, there's this kind of like cultivating moral virtue because you have like health of heart and health of mind, like soundness of mind. And this leads you to having what they call like de or te, which is inherent character, in that through that inherent character, inherent power and integrity. And so you're able to have this virtuous quality. And this is really similar to what's said about Artemis, you know, to be that she is able to be a huntress and strong and fast and agile and provide for herself and not need a husband, because she has this sort of like these virtues relating to both nature and society. You know, there's a similar kind of shape in there. And then the spirit that relates, let's look at, just going to change the image here. So there's the Chinese lunar mansions over the 4 animals. This one would fall into the azure dragon. You can see that the Chinese mansions are distributed constellationally, and they're of various sizes. They're not equal sizes. But the spirit of the body that resides in the heart is called the Shen. And this spirit kind of rules over like the spark of interest, and also has kind of like, it has like a biological origin, as like the being coming from the pre-heaven essences, or like it comes from your mother and father, and then is sort of like implanted in you. But then it needs to be fed by your the post-heaven essences, you know, of like health coming from stomach and spleen, and this is just like an interesting rhythm, as like the lunation in leopard that came a couple shapes before was talking about a heart in a different sense, like the heart of the scorpion, and we saw like maladies of the heart with as vaccination effects. But a couple shapes over, through a different kind of route of a holistic coherence, we're seeing a kind of like, okay, we need to get our mind in order, and we need to get our heart in order, because we need to have good character and be virtuous in some sense, and be Artemis like. And it even, if the mind is ruling over the senses, also the heart mind. So this thing with like hunting and tracking associated with Artemis and deer shape, also being like, if you want to have keen eyes, keen hearing, keen taste and touch, and be able to get out in the bush and be effective, this layer of your being has to be sound, and be supported. Let's see here. It also is the heart relates to the sound of laughing, which is interesting, as when you take deer and put it in one of the axes and relate it back to the sounds from the prayer to Mene, it is the moaning noise. And so it's almost like the supplement to, like, a moaning noise is obviously is sort of like the opposite of laughing, like groaning versus, groaning with discomfort versus like laughing from humor or joy. It's almost like they're the counter of each other. But yeah, just interesting how the shapes from like kind of like an organ holistic sense like reverberate back through from one mansion system to another.
Interesting. Just like in terms of like aspects to this eclipse coming up, one of the things I noticed is Neptune is squaring like broadly by 10 degrees, but Neptune is squaring the eclipse. And the reason I'm paying attention to it is because Neptune just stationed direct, and Neptune has been like a big part of the narrative for the last 2 years, because Neptune is a mutable sign, so it's been squaring, the signs, the eclipse. And we're going to have Mercury squaring Neptune and the Sun squaring Neptune in the first 10 days of December. So I feel like this upcoming eclipse, if there's like kind of effect from it, like from a like protocol perspective, purification, obviously, which comes with South Node, and then even more so doubled because of that deer mention. But on a mundane level, I feel like this Neptune square and then the Neptune influence after Neptune just stationed direct is going to bring, again, confusion. The other thing with South Node is that it's associated with confusion also, and fog and ghosts, hauntings and stuff like that. So, we don't get to choose our fate. Sometimes it just happens. But also, I guess the purpose of engaging with astrology and the lunar places and like eclipse to a certain extent is to, make it the best possible outcomes, and having a spiritual practice and purifying and all of that can help. The other side of that coin, I think, for people who are completely anchored into the material reality and just trying to really gain more sort of material traction in December, there might be more Neptunian heaviness and confusion and fog and sort of haunting and possession that comes with like South Node eclipses that are not really worked properly,
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and that Neptune is going to be a big player moving forward. When I was talking about like the April 30th eclipse, and that's going to be Venus and Jupiter in Pisces or just exactly after Neptune. So like we're just going to keep, and that's when we were kind of predicting, because of that activity within Neptune being drugs, and then that New Zealand being like, yeah, let's make party drug testing legal at festivals and see if that develops more in the world. As the horror of Astro World event was kind of the opposite end of that, where there's mysterious drugs going around and and even being injected into people. The other, for the positive Jupiter Venus version of that, is like, yeah, don't worry about your stuff being laced with fentanyl. Go like lose your mind. Like all the drugs here have been purified. And but in the meanwhile, because that's Jupiter in Pisces. So when Jupiter went into Pisces like May 13th, like we were saying earlier, in the US at least, the mask mandates were dropped that day. And when Jupiter went back into Aquarius, like in July 28th, was when the Delta variant arose. And so we've been just getting like variant after variant while Jupiter's in Aquarius, like helping Saturn do his thing. But when Jupiter goes back into Pisces, strangely enough, like December 28th, after a really tense end of the year, we might see some turn of events in that, especially like go more towards the spring in the Northern Hemisphere. But for the moment, looking at this eclipse, doing your purification for South Node reasons, doing your purification for Artemis reasons, being like pure enough to walk into nature and be one with nature, and to be able to like work directly with animals and be of the wilds, and being able to step away from the city and the hubs of socialization to do so, and kind of become virtuous on a more sheer nature-based, like natural level, which suits the North Node moving into Taurus. It suits like Mars currently being in Scorpio and kind of like hunting, tracking type thoughts. So I mean, yeah, it's like a good time to kind of just type thoughts to go back into your modes, to get into your senses and make sure your senses are sharp out there. Like I think it's a good practice right now to, when you're outdoors or where you're anywhere, indoors, outdoors, kind of treating all of reality like nature. But it's very explicit when you're immersed in nature, to ask yourself, what's going on here? Like, what's happening? What are the birds doing? Not just like, oh, there's some pretty birds, but like, what are they doing? Like, what's that bird doing right now?
I find that's like the North Node end of things. I feel like you don't have to do anything with the South Node. It's more just about this sort of surrender, you don't have.
I just mean being like with the Artemis, like significations, just kind of like being aware of what's occurring in your reality. And that's sort of ascetic too, just sort of like being aware of everything.
Like mindfulness.
Yeah, mindfulness, but sort of that ecosystemic like mindfulness of not just like, I care about nature, so I think they should put us in like climate crisis lockdowns. Be like, I care about nature, like when I'm in nature, I have an awareness of what's going on around me. And that helps me kind of move about it in a way that's in accordance with nature.
Yeah, like, just being present.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I'm like, I was geeking out about the South Node because I can never get enough. And
that's so like Rahu Ketu, like flip,
Yeah. And the South Node, they associate magician, doctors, healers, and astrologers with the K2, with the South Node.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there's this thing about like kind of this detached vocation, it's like this detached but like wisdom induced like vocation. Like I think people who are becoming healers or astrologers or even magician, it's more vocational. They're not in it to like succeed in society so much, I guess. But it's also about like understanding reality beyond illusion, because North Node is associated with illusion, and the South Node is associated with moksha or illumination. So there is an opportunity right now, I think, also to just kind of like glance behind the veil. And I posted last night like the allegory of the cave from Plato. It seemed like very eclipsy to me, and it's just like people in a cave like watching shadows, and if you try to take them outside of the cave into the sun to show them other things or perspective, then their eyes are burning and they'll hate you.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's something still, I think, about like this particular time where we have an ability to actually just synthesize things and step back. And that was through the lack of mobility, but it's offering a different type of perspective and mobility. You know, it's more about like internal understanding.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, totally. I totally agree. I guess that's what I was saying is like when you can't move about the world because of all these restrictions, you can pay attention to how you move in the world in more of like an embodied level, you know, how you actually move through your environment.
And dreaming also, because like that's the best mode of, that's been the best mode of transportation.
Totally. Definitely.
You know?
Before we go, should we read some of the writings from past?
Yeah, sounds good. So I pulled two reading. I pulled one from January and one from February. That was before the eclipses were happening here in their dimensions. So they're really kind of more pure essence there. But what you guys who are listening have to know is that a lot of the channel writing is kind of precognitive also. So there, it's pretty oracular in terms of like what was about to come through. And that's why I pulled like the first one here. You can read it if you want, from January 20th, 2020. I think, yeah, that's yours.
Okay. Better than forever now. Eclipse in the heart to deliver and betray the message of blood vessel. The worms in my hand are worth 1,000,000 plants bearing truths as fruit, gray and peeling apart from the wall, slick and thick, following in the house of clay, beneath the ground travel, night travel, torch travel, follow the man of clay, go below, and the ocean surges calm, between the seams, be my border, display to me the pearl, and I will breathe how we do in the forest when no one can hear. The special breath, cards displaying horse and rider, young boy entering the game. My name is the same. Call me Wind.
I love it.
Yeah, it's like, so this is January 20th, 2020. This is like...
there was no eclipses here yet, but eclipse in the heart to deliver.
And there was no mention of lockdown yet, you know? Like, I think...
No.
Like, there was barely mention of COVID. I think if you track it back, you can track the very first mentions of COVID to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction on January 12th. But no, it wasn't on anybody's radar at this point. And so we're talking about travel, but also the stuff about the heart and blood vessels from the Chinese lunar mention coming up also.
Yeah, it's interesting because at that point we were not looking at the Chinese mention very much.
Yeah.
So this channeled writing is from mid-February, February 16, 2020. The woods are left alone after the storm, diagonal of where you stand in the southeast corner. A pair of eyes are watching you. It's not a priest, but a predator. I can't say that word.
Predator.
Predator. You can't see. That's what makes it predatory. Praying and praying are two different activities. One is for life, the other one is for redemption. Power is all around, but people only have soft vision. Movements keep the heat going. You want to know, but observe only. The best answers come when you observe and shut your precious little mouth. Unicorns in colorful jacket full of pride. This is the other side of the world. Everything is dead here. Carousel. Totally.
I mean, that's like, yeah, these two writings are perfect. Like you said, it's oracular, you know, the praying, and then we get the south
eyes watching, but you can't see them.
Yeah.
And it's a time of observing only.
Totally. South Node and Artemis's sign, you know, the ascetic praying, well, during the shape of the huntress, you know, and then like it's also funny, the unicorns in colorful jackets full of pride is in the Arabic lunar mansions before this was currently the shape of the centaur. Ostriches were seen here, you know.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So like in the constellation. So it's a place of
interesting
on the stellar layer of like colorful colorful plumage, you know, which is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely in that second writing, there's definitely this vibe of like, don't speak too much, observe what's happening. There's a lot of, or there's like eyes observing, kind of praying, you know. So even there, we talk of like hunting and stuff. So, but it's like, are you being hunted?
Deer in the headlights. It's totally like an eyes situation, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that might be good for this episode. What do you think?
Sounds good. Yeah, no, I have nothing else to
say. So I guess we're gonna say goodbye and
see you on the flip side.
Yeah. Ooh, watch out. All right, we'll see you in 28. Ciao.